want to talk today a little bit about why we're interested in new pre-emergent herbicides, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we've seen this year around the new chemistry that's either here or coming and why it's done what it's done. And then I will talk a little bit about what we're trying to do in this trial. We've known for a long time that we've got a lot of resistance in ryegrass, but what we're starting to now pick up is resistance to the pre-emergent herbicides other than trifluralin. So when we do our surveys now, we're finding 10-15% of samples that we get in are resistant to Avidex and to Arcade, less to Box of Gold, and 1 or 2% resistant to Butazan, and maybe pick up one resistant to Sakura. So, the J's and K's we've been using them now for quite some time, and we are starting now to just see a little bit of resistance come along to those. So having new mode of action herbicides is always good in trying to get us one step ahead of where the ryegrass is. So, we really want to find out how to use this new chemistry and how to use it well. But one of the things that, we've all learned about pre-emergent herbicides in the last 2 decades is that they're all different and they all behave differently depending upon what type of year we have and what soil type you've got. And so you really need to come to grips with lots more complexity around pre-emergent herbicides. This season, I think the big news this season is we had a lot of rainfall prior to sowing, so pretty much filled the profile in a lot of areas. We haven't had that much rain since sowing, and particularly in the latter part of the season it's been pretty dry. That's always good for pre-emergent herbicides to work, because by the time they've run out of puff, if it's not raining, no more ryegrass comes up. And so we've often seen that if you've got good early control with your pre-emergent herbicides through that early moisture, they're still working pretty well. So we've had some really, really good results, and pretty much everything's tended to work. In the higher rainfall areas, Box of Gold being short persistence has fallen over early as we would expect, but most of the other products have done pretty well. Where we've had some trouble has really been around that amount of rainfall we've got after sowing. So where that's been particularly low, some of the less soluble products, Sakura as an example, have struggled a little bit. And I've seen some examples where it really hasn't controlled the weeds as well as we'd normally expect it to do so. And that's due to that rainfall after sowing. One of the other things that we certainly noticed this year was, I was talking to you about Luximax last year and making sure we're a bit careful with it because of its solubility and the crop safety. And I haven't seen as much damage as I perhaps expected in the first year of using it, with everybody being a bit gung-ho and just going out and putting it out under all sorts of conditions. There's been some crop damage, particularly on lighter soils, but part of the reason why we haven't seen perhaps more damage than we did is because we actually had that profile full to start with. And so what that meant was that you're putting that herbicide out, the ground's full of water. When it rains, that new rainfall just moves down fairly slowly and takes the herbicide down fairly slowly and not as fast and not as far. Whereas if we'd gone out with a dry profile, that first rainfall event would have pushed that herbicide down further. So in a lot of ways, we've got away this year because of that full profile. But I think as a cautionary, consider what water you've got in the ground. Next year, you might have put Luximax out in a paddock this year and went, oh gee, that's fabulous. I'm going to put it out everywhere next year. Just be a little bit careful, particularly of those lighter soils that have got low organic matter. They're still going to be troublesome. There are a few that were problematic this year. And if you do get a big rainfall event on it, you will see some damage. So just take a little bit of care. In terms of weed control, Luximax has really been excellent this year. Just probably seen a couple of trials, paddocks around the place where some of the ryegrass hasn't been controlled as well. Not entirely sure what's driving that. It might just be ryegrass populations, but generally it's been pretty good. The other one that's coming is Overwatch, and I would say that in every trial I've had seen Overwatch in this year, it has performed better than we've seen it in any other year. And I think that's to do with the moisture we had in the soil. The fact that you're putting it on, typically it was going on, mostly still trial work, going on that moist seed bed, and that was starting to activate it when it first went out. That's, I think, good news that product did work pretty well. In a different year with a dry start, it'll probably struggle a little bit. It'll probably be sort of in between where something like Luximax is and where Sakura is in those dry starts. So just do take a bit of notice when you get some next year about what the weather conditions are and what you might actually expect to get out of that. We also saw a fair bit of crop effect this year in the trials. It ranged from hardly anything, which we've seen in the past, to a trial I had at Inverleigh where the whole crop went white. You can't actually tell the effect now on the crop, so the crop grows out of it. It's spectacular, but probably not of major concern. Okay, we haven't ever seen any yield loss out of that crop effect, but it is there. Do expect it will happen. Don't get too concerned about it. In terms of what we're trying to do in this trial here, what we're really trying to do in this trial is we're trying to sort of showcase and look at what the opportunities are around some of this new chemistry and how do we mix it. Because one of the things we know that all of these pre-emergent herbicides have got some weaknesses. You know, the weather doesn't play ball, we don't get or we get too much rainfall, and they've all got a few weaknesses. So we're often looking at how do we actually shore up those weaknesses by mixtures. And so we've got a trial here where we've got the Luximax and Overwatch with a range of mixtures. And generally speaking around the mixtures, many of them work really well. So Overwatch mixes with every other pre-emergent herbicide we've tried. The only one we haven't put it with is Luximax. So I don't know how that's going to go because we haven't tried it. But all of the other ones, it works pretty well with those. We would be looking at those mixtures as being managing particular situations. So for example, the mixture with trifluralin will be pretty useful under some of those sort of drier, patchier starts where trifluralin really shines. You know, that'll help out there. The other end we would go is we've mixed it with Sakura, but we're focusing that on the high rainfall areas. So, you know, it's 6 tonne plus wheat crops, and that's worked very, very well in those sort of circumstances. Mixtures with Luximax. Trifluralin mixed with Luximax is pretty good. It's probably the outstanding mixture, but the other products all mix reasonably well except the group K herbicides. So don't mix Sakura with Luximax. We're not seeing too much of an effect here, but we do see crop effect on that. And the trial I had at Inverleigh last year where we did that, we had over a tonne of yield loss compared to Sakura Overwatch. Sakura Luximax was a tonne behind, so it cost us a fair bit of money to do that. So that's one that you shouldn't do. If you're going to mix, it's trifluralin. Avedex is good, Prosulfocarb's fine, not Boxer Gold. Don't put Boxer Gold in there because it's got group K chemistry in it. We've also got some new pre-emergent broadleaf herbicides in this trial. We've got Callisto from Syngenta. And look, Callisto is a group H herbicide, and probably its strength for us is that we can put it out as a pre-emergent. We can get that early control of radish and mustard and those sorts of weeds, and we don't have to try and come back early in the crop and control them. So that's probably where I think that we've got programs where you struggle to get another application on at that early post-emergent stage, where you really need to put things like velocity and those herbicides out. Callisto will give you an opportunity, you put it up front, and then you don't have to actually worry about that early application. It gives you the opportunity to come back and do a late cleanup. What you won't be able to do with Callisto is add another group H to it. So don't come out post-emergent and put something like velocity over it, because you'll really hammer the crop. You're relying in Callisto, it's 9-point press wheel, so actually you're relying on keeping it away from the crop. So it's like a lot of our other pre-emergent herbicides, the crop's not immune to it. We've got to keep it away. You will see some effects from it from time to time, a bit of white discoloration, but if you put another group H over it, that'll cause you some real damage, so don't do that. So that's Callisto. I think it's got a nice place in programs that really struggle to get round and round and round the paddock. So if you don't want to keep going out, that's probably the place to put that. The other one we got is Veraxor. It's new Group G chemistry from BASF. A pretty broad range of broadleaf weed control out of Veraxor. Bit of grass control, a little bit of ryegrass control, but frankly for us here in South Australia, I don't think it gives us enough ryegrass control. So we're not going to rely on it for the grass control component. We're going to be wanting to put grass herbicides with it. And this is a little bit of a concern. The label says that, yeah, you can mix some of the grass pre-emergence with it. Do take care. Certainly if you've got situations where you're likely to get damage out of your pre-emergent grass herbicides, so lighter soils for example, then that mixture up front could give you a bit of crop damage. So you might want to just be a little bit careful about how you do that, whether one of the suggestions is you can split the pre-emergent grass herbicide from the Viraxor, so you could put the Viraxor out with your knockdown, come back a week later and put your pre-emergent herbicide out, or you could just choose another option depending upon your weed spectrum. So, and good soils, you're probably fine with it. Getting into those soils where you get a lot more mobility of pre-emergent herbicides, you probably want to be really careful which grass herbicides you put with it. Anything that's likely to get down into the crop row is probably something you want to steer clear of. They do offer us a new opportunity in cereals. You know, we've learned a whole new way of controlling grasses, and our data on where we've done our long-term integrated weed management trials, it's been really obvious that good pre-emergent herbicide control of your grass weeds is worth a lot of money in terms of yield at the end of the day. That's where you're actually getting your big yield boost from weed control from. Going in and controlling weeds after they come up, we've already actually lost some yield by the time we're doing that. So the opportunity to get broadleaf weeds before they come up and before they start competing with the crop, rather than waiting till mid-season and trying to kill them, will actually have some benefits where broadleaf weeds are a major problem. So they're products to think about how you might fit them into your system, whether they've got a place in your particular system. They do give you an opportunity to not have to worry about early post-emergent control of broadleaf weeds, and I think that's probably where the big benefit's going to be. Overwatch has been really good in terms of persistence this year. So we've, 8 weeks after sowing, we're still seeing discoloration on new ryegrasses germinating out of it. Now, I think some of that's because we've had that dry period. In a very wet situation, it might run out earlier, but I think we're going to get, it's going to be at least as good in terms of length. That's probably where Sakura is in terms of those new germinations, but it's going to depend a bit on rainfall. One of the things that in past years we've seen is that its overall control of ryegrass is probably just a touch behind where Sakura is. It's every bit as good as Sakura this year, but in general it's probably a little bit behind. And I think it's because where we get more rainfall, it just runs out a little earlier. But we're going to get good length out of it. It's not like going to be box of gold. We're going to get quite good length out of it. Part of the issue with the chemistry that we've got is that we don't have a lot of crop safety. And so how we get crop safety is we actually move that herbicide out of the crop row. What that means, of course, is that using these new chemistries with disc seeders is problematic. And I would think that the first thing I would say is don't even think about using Luximax with the disc seeder. Year like this, you might have got away with it, but in a normal year, that will actually wash into the crop row because you've got it close to where the seed is. So you must move that one out. I know that FMC's looking around disc seeders for Overwatch. They might be an opportunity for some types of disc seeders, depending on how much soil you move. For wheat, probably not for canola, maybe not for barley. So that's going to really narrow up your opportunities there. I think that for me, the one where disc seeders will make sense that's coming forward is probably Matino Complete, because it is a lot less mobile. And so that would be where there might be an opportunity to get a label for disc. And a lot of it is really about making sure that herbicide doesn't get into the crop row. That's where the trouble arises. We know for some of the existing herbicides how we can set up systems so that doesn't happen. We haven't really tried this new chemistry under that. And I think that that's a bit of where, we really need somebody to go and do some work and go, well, if we've got this sort of amount of soil movement, are those discs, are discs fine? And I think that that's how we're probably going to have to think about it, not this piece of machinery, but how much soil movement you get. And somehow or other, and I know when we were back doing this work, that was one of the things we were hoping to come up with, was a soil movement rule, and we did. But what we couldn't do is get industry to adopt that as a label exercise, probably because of the risk around, how do you actually measure soil movement, which is still a challenge. And the best way to do it is actually to go out and sow a bit and then go back behind and see what you've done, rather than going, if you set it up this way, you'll get this amount of soil movement, because it also depends on your soil type and how you're actually, running the disc system, speed you're driving, all of those things come into play. So you've just got to, do a lap, hop out, have a look. Have I shifted that soil out of the crop row far enough? Yeah, I'm okay. Then things like, your box of gold are probably all right. Overwatch will be all right in wheat, probably barley, if you're moving enough soil. Luximax is still going to be a problem. So I don't think we're going to find any disc system where Luximax will make it work. And what we really want is a setup where we can actually put the product on the ground and you can run a disc over it and you won't get damage. And we know we can do that with Sakura in wheat in most situations. So I'm expecting that we'll see the same thing with Matino Complete, that'll be the best opportunity for disc seeders. So they both Overwatch and Luximax have some activity on other grasses. It's probably, for the grasses we're mostly worried about, it's probably not enough for us to be really excited by. With Luximax, under the right rainfall events, you can get pretty good control of barley grass and reasonable control of brome grass, but if you don't get the right rainfall events, you don't. And I think that's a challenge with some of these other grasses. If you don't get that rainfall, if it's dry after sowing, these herbicides don't work on them. They might still work on ryegrass, but they won't work on barley grass, they won't work on brome grass. And so, we've actually done a little bit of work around that if you've got 7 days of dry conditions after the herbicides have gone out, and then it rains, you still get ryegrass control out of pretty much all of the products, but none of them then control barley grass or brome grass very well. So it's really about those environmental conditions, that how much control you get. So it's going to be, nice to have when it happens, but you're not going to be using these products as your mainline strategy for things like brome or barley grass. I think probably the big thing about Overwatch is it's got some broadleaf weed control, and for us here in this area of South Australia, it's fabulous on Bifora. And I think that's going to be probably one of its big selling points around here, is that people will now be able to get really good control of Bifora with a pre-emergent herbicide, and that's going to be one of the things for Overwatch. Luximax doesn't really have broadleaf weed control at all. It's like a lot of the others that we've got. It's grass only, mostly ryegrass. Matino Complete, when it comes, will give us perhaps a broader spectrum around those grasses. Again, we still need to see a bit more of that to know how confident we're going to be that it's going to continue to work on those grasses. So that'll be as we get to see more of that in the next year or so as it comes, we'll get a better feel for how that'll do some of these other grasses. But again, I think its main strength's really still going to be ryegrass.